avoid as many of the breaking waves as possible. In most conditions, you won't be surfing continuously. Being able to maneuver is important. When the wind is moderate, you have more latitude. But when the wind picks up, the slot where you can go gets narrower. Head up too high and you broach to weather. Go too low and you round down. Either way, broaching is something to avoid in any conditions. But to naval architect and author Steve Dashew, it's the heavy seas that pose the real threat.
Broaching is a subject which people get real uptight about. And in moderate conditions, it really doesn't mean anything. It's a gust of wind comes along, the boat gets out of control, you round up, the sails flap, big deal. But if you've got big seas running, and the boat gets sideways to the waves, and then another second or third wave comes along, it's a breaking sea, now you've got a problem, because the boat is in a very vulnerable attitude. So the question becomes, how do you avoid the broach? And you do that by keeping the boat under control. And keeping the boat under control is best done running at the fastest speed that you can control the boat at. Now, at some point, a situation is going to arise where a wave comes along or a really strong squall, and the steering equilibrium of the boat is overpowered, and now you're lying beam to the seas with the sails flogging like mad, and maybe the spreader's in the water, who knows. To get the boat headed back downwind as quickly as possible, what you have to do is relieve pressure on the rig. The quickest way to do that is to dump the bang or the main sheet. The next thing is to let the jib go. But whatever you have to do to get the boat upright so the rudder gets a good bite and you can get the bow turned off is what you have to do.
There are two ways of broaching a boat. There is a round up and a round down. It is always preferable, if you are going to broach, to round up than it is to round down. When you round up, which is what most people call a broach, the boat tends to just round up into the wind. The sails will luff. Eventually you'll be able to drive the boat off and continue on your course. When you have a round down, it means that going downwind that you have jibed the boat unintentionally, and the boat has jibed over and is going in a different direction. That uncontrolled jibe is going to present you problems because the sails are on the wrong side of the boat. The jib's on the wrong side of the boat. If you have a preventer on the main, it is on the wrong side of the boat. And once you round down, the boat will tend to lay over in the water and virtually stop, and the sails are going to pin the boat down in the water, and then you have a real difficult time getting the boat up. Then once it rounds up into the wind, you have control of the boat, and you want to continue back on the course you were, then you have to jibe the boat again in heavy air. That's where you get in trouble. Your best bet is, in those conditions, if you round down and broach, and you are able to get the boat up, get the boat going on the course that the sails are set on, get the boat going, and tack the boat around. Don't jibe the boat. Heavy weather jibes are very, very dangerous. Tacking is usually pretty easy, so don't be afraid to tack the boat around in heavy air.
There are a couple of basics that will help avoid a broach. Try to keep the boat sailing flat. By reducing heel and weather helm, you cut the tendency to round up. Keep the boat heading straight down the face of waves. If a wave catches either quarter, it may spin the boat out. And probably most important, avoid sailing by the lee. An accidental jibe in heavy seas can be a real disaster. Jibing in heavy air is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in sailing. The penalties for mistakes are usually severe. This doesn't mean you can't jibe when you have to, but it should be done carefully, and timing is very important. First, pick the place and time. You want to do the jibe when there is good boat speed, usually moving down the face of the wave. The boat speed gives good control and decreases the apparent wind. When you're headed dead downwind, bring the main into the center of the boat and take enough wraps off the winch to allow the sail to be let out quickly on the new jibe. Once the boom is centered, continue to steer by the lee until the main comes over to the new jibe. Then quickly let the sheet run without allowing any pressure on the sail until it's completely out. Then come up to the new course and square up the boat to the next wave. Knowing all the heavy weather techniques really isn't enough when you're in rough conditions. There's an important psychological element too.
If there's one dangerous part of heavy weather sailing. It's allowing yourself to be overcome by fear, to have an inertia set in. You're in the boat, it's blowing like stink, there are big seas, you're obviously concerned, maybe the weather's going to get worse, you don't know what the situation is, and you don't do anything. You know you should be on deck, you hear the leech of the jib chattering, the lead isn't right, you know you should move the lead forward, or you should put up more sail or take sail down, but you're tired and you're concerned, and you sit there and you just don't do anything. That's the most dangerous part of heavy weather sailing.
I've never steered us through anything this big.
If you're just starting out and you get out in 25, 30 knots of wind and you've got a bit of a lumpy sea, I mean, you're concerned. You don't know what your capabilities are. You don't know what your boat's capabilities are. When that breeze passes, all of a sudden your anxiety level's gone up. Next time it takes 35 knots or 40 knots or 50 knots.
There doesn't seem to be any substitute for experience when it comes to heavy weather sailing. With it comes the confidence that's essential.
The real test is building your own confidence. It really comes down to a question of self-confidence more than anything else. Most people are nervous of sailing in strong winds, lack confidence, and therefore they don't really feel comfortable in it. And I think the only way you really get confidence is to get out there and try it. There's no way around that. But confidence really also comes from having the understanding of your equipment, knowing it isn't going to break down and let you down, and you're only dealing with the elements. Now, if you've got your boat right, the sails right, the rig right, you can really go out there with a certain amount of confidence, know you're safe, and battle with the elements. And when you get experience with it, you'll get the self-confidence, and thereafter you'll enjoy it.
When thinking about preparing for heavy weather sailing, it's important to emphasize that a good, well-prepared boat will take care of you long after you're no longer able to take care of yourself. In the 1979 Fastnet race, many crews, fearing capsize, abandoned ship. The crews were lost, and the ships were found floating safely the next day. In thinking about storm survival, think about preserving the crew. A cold, wet, fatigued crew will not make good decisions. The first and most important element of personal protection is staying on the boat. A sailor swept overboard in heavy conditions has almost no chance of rescue or survival. A safety harness and tethers should be mandatory equipment anytime you're offshore. The strict rule is, be attached to the boat anytime you are on deck, even in the cockpit. This usually requires jack lines to be rigged, allowing crew to clip on and move forward without having to disengage from the boat. The jack lines should be made of 6,000-pound test nylon webbing, which lies flat and is less prone to roll underfoot than metal cable or line. The tether should be long enough to attach on the windward jack line, but extend to allow work on the low side. The harness should be well made and designed for the purpose.
If I can stress anything, don't go out and buy the economy model. When you're talking about a life harness and a line and a hook, you want the best, and you want to know absolutely guaranteed that that's not going to break and that's not going to snap off under the load of a 200-pound man being washed down the deck or being washed over.
Some higher quality foul weather gear features built-in harnesses. The main advantage is that the harness is not a separate piece of equipment, but you'll have to wear the jacket whenever you need the harness. At the other end of the spectrum are separate harnesses like the Swidlick Fastnet that are serious pieces of safety equipment. It has a mesh vest which keeps the harness from getting tangled and distributes loads. These harnesses and some high-quality foul weather jackets are designed to integrate inflatable flotation devices. While not Coast Guard approved, they have been in use in Europe for years and provide much more buoyancy than standard PFDs. The importance of flotation was brought home in the last Whitbread round-the-world race. There were 5 separate incidents in the stormy Southern Ocean when sailors were washed overboard. In 4 of those cases, the sailors were rescued, but only because they stayed afloat. When it comes to safety equipment, there's an important principle. To be safe, a sailor must actually wear the safety gear. That means comfort and convenience are important safety features. The awkward, poorly designed harness won't be worn. Likewise, poorly designed foul weather gear won't do its job.
Wet weather gear, when you really don't need wet weather gear, it's really wet.
Warren lures learned early what it's like to be wet and cold at sea.
I used the analogy once before. It's once you get chilled, it's like standing out in a rainstorm in 20-degree weather and wrapping yourself in a wet wool blanket and sleeping on the porch through the night. I mean, it just saps your energy, and you've got nothing left. You're very lethargic. And of course, when you get to that state, that's where the real danger comes in, because that's where you know, you're going to make a mistake either mentally or physically, and including, you know, possibly even falling overboard. It's imperative that you keep yourself warm, comfortable, dry, and well-fed in heavy weather conditions.
Well-designed and constructed foul weather gear, like Henry Lloyd, can take dousings and still keep you dry because of watertight material and seams, double wrist and leg closures, and double protective flaps for the coat and pants zippers. It's important to have a good hood and fleece collar that keep the neck warm and protect it from chafe in long use. Plus, the gear should have the ability to integrate flotation devices both inside and outside. Hypothermia is a danger, but in heavy weather, even experienced sailors can be incapacitated by something more common, seasickness.
I think seasickness is maybe the #1 factor when the Coast Guard gets involved in the cases I've been on.
Probably no one has more rescue experience or had more personal exposure to crews in distress at sea than the instructors at the Coast Guard's Motor Lifeboat School. On one rescue mission, the crew of a sailboat was too weak to even grab a line offered by their rescuers. Seasickness had put lives in jeopardy.
Some years ago, off of Point St. George, we had a 34-foot sailboat, man and wife and a child, and they were in such tough condition, they just couldn't take a tow line. Sea conditions were such that we just couldn't come alongside, and we ended up, helicopter had to drop a basket to try and get them in it, and they were so exhausted and just beat to their knees from seasickness that we ended up with a Coast Guard air crewman from the helo, had to go down and individually place each person and ride up the basket with, I think first with the baby, then the wife, and then the husband, and they abandoned their boat. Really, really living on the edge when you have to do that.
Preventing seasickness before it gets to this extreme state is essential. Even experienced sailors who have acclimated to the motion at sea will take anti-seasickness medication when they know the weather will be extreme. The question, are you wearing your patch, is becoming a sort of sailor shorthand for seasickness protection. The patch is the transderm scope, sold by prescription and worn behind the ear. This timed-release medication is considered by many to be the most effective and convenient of the anti-seasickness drugs. A common side effect is dry mouth. There may be other more serious side effects, so as with any seasick medication, read the package carefully before using it. Stressing the human element goes far beyond personal protection gear. It also applies to our general approach in this program. Volumes have already been written on the importance of preparing a boat for ocean going and the rigors of heavy weather. We can't, nor do we want to try to condense that information. It's too important, but it's a subject for another tape. Instead, we want to deal with storm preparation in a larger sense, limiting ourselves to 3 very broad areas of preparation of both crew and boat. The first involves preparing the boat and crew together, testing the boat's capabilities so you can learn your own as well, long before you ever encounter heavy weather.
You know, you can read a lot of books, you can learn a lot from books, but you can only learn so much, and you can't get real experience until you take your boat out in heavy weather. And I found that you really reduce a lot of anxiety, because most people, hopefully, are real concerned and real scared about heavy weather sailing on the ocean, because there are a lot of things that can happen. And by taking their boats out ahead of time, small distances, maybe 50 miles, what some people do is just go out of sight of land, straight out into the ocean for 24 hours and then turn around and come back. But finding out how they handle that, and just as importantly, how their boat handles heavy weather before they get out there, makes all the difference in the world. Because if you're in the middle of 50 knots off the east or west coast of the U.S. and are real scared about your survival, That's not the time to be trying out different sail combinations and trying out heaving to or lying a hull or towing warps or using a drogue. The time to be doing that is before you go. And
related to knowing your boat and the boat's capabilities is having this knowledge evenly spread through a shorthanded crew.
Well, I think it's very important that everyone on the boat should be able to do everything on the boat. And if they don't know how, they should learn. And the skipper should take time to teach the crew how to do each part of the boat, because there'll be times when the skipper will be doing something and someone else has to steer. The skipper will be steering, someone has to reef the main. There's times when everyone should be able to do everything on the boat.
Finally, it is important that the basic systems on the boat, the main reefing, the roller reefing, the traveler, be simple, reliable, and easy to use. Heavy weather has a way of finding the weak spots of all equipment. Usually, control systems that are inconvenient to use or take more physical effort than they should in light air won't work at all in a storm. Before you head out, there are a few other things you can do to make sailing in heavy weather a little easier. Have a good way to secure coiled halyards. A bungee cord loop or a sail tie works well. Set up the nylon web jacklines before heading offshore so they're ready to go. And a little advanced work with your roller reefing headsail will really pay off.
One of the first things you want to do to make your life easier when you go out sailing is predetermine the jib car leads for your headsail. The way to do this is to go out on a day with varying wind conditions and adjust your headsail to keep your boat in balance. Typically we do this for varying wind conditions of 5 knots, 15 to 20 knots, 20 to 25 knots. Once you get your sail in the proper amount of sail out and you've got your boat in balance, mark your jib car lead. Now whenever you go out in similar conditions, you'll know the exact position of your jib car lead. Now we're going to go out and look for varying conditions of wind. We're going to look for these 5-knot windows, 15 to 20, 20 to 25 knots of wind. And we're going to roll the sail up until our boat is nicely in balance and we have the proper trim on her. Then we're going to take a magic marker, indelible ink pen, and mark along the foot of the sail where it is when it rolls up. Now, whenever we encounter similar conditions, we know exactly how far to roll the sail up again.
Beyond equipping the boat with the right gear, there's a lot that the sailor can do to prepare the boat's control systems to work well in heavy weather.
And you want to know that reefing system backwards and forwards. Again, not only practice it at the dock, but obviously have extensively practiced it out in the bay or off the coast, so you really know it works. A good slab reefing system, I believe you can do the whole thing within 30 seconds. You should have the halyard pre-marked so you can drop that mainsail down to a certain point. You should have the other lines pre-marked so you can just tighten them up. And to me, that's probably one of the best safety things that you can do for controlled sailing. Again, you hear that word, controlled sailing.
When you're finally offshore on a blow, and it looks like the weather will get even worse, the next step in controlled sailing is to set up for the storm sail. On boats with roller reefing, this is the time to furl the headsail completely and set a storm sail on an inner stay. The quick release lever by ABI makes the job fast and easy as long as you get it up early. With this stay, you have a big advantage. You can set a new sail without having to unfurl and drop the larger jib.
One of the biggest advantages of having a storm staysail is not only does it reduce the sail area up forward here, but it also brings your center of effort down closer to the boat's deck, which will reduce your heeling, and also it moves that effort back aft, which will help the helmsman steer the boat by reducing the weather helm.
Sloop-rigged boats without roller reefing and an inner stay would set a storm jib on the forestay. Storm sails are not only smaller, but built to take the rigors of sailing in high winds. The storm staysail uses a tack pennant and is high off the deck to avoid being hit by waves. The high visibility orange is a real safety plus when you're in a sea of white foam. Leech line adjustment is very important on all storm sails. Any flutter can do some serious damage. The sail is usually led inboard and forward of the normal jib sheeting leads. Experiment to find the right lead and set up a system that is ready to go. For shortening the mainsail beyond the second reef, there are two options: a third reef or a storm trysail. The third reef is straightforward, particularly if the reefing line was rigged earlier in milder conditions. The alternative is the storm trysail. This sail is set on the mast but does not use the boom. This is the classic storm configuration: a storm staysail or jib and a trysail. The sail area has been significantly reduced and the center of effort is down and in the middle of the boat. It's a good setup, but you need to practice and experiment with the sails long before you head offshore.
Now that you've got your trysail hoisted, there's a couple things you need to consider. One is the fore and aft lead of your trysail sheets. You want to eliminate all flutter in this sail and get equal tension both on your leech and your foot. Remember, you're going to be carrying this in upwards of 40 knots of wind, and any flutter on this is going to tear the sail apart in no time at all. Another tool to use to eliminate that flutter is your leech cord. Remember to pull this as taut as you can just to eliminate the flutter on the leech of your sail. The other thing to consider are your two trysail sheets, both port and starboard. These act as a barber hauler to position your clew either to windward or leeward, depending on your point of sail. You can use these things to carry this trysail to its greatest advantage.
The effort it takes to rig the trysail is its biggest disadvantage. Without a separate track on the mast, it's often more than most people can handle.
What they don't realize is how difficult it is to rig and to operate a trysail on a boat. And it's not something you can do for the first time as you get into storm conditions. And that's what a trysail is used for, is to allow the boat to either heave to or just keep the boat moving in a particular direction in storm conditions. And I have likened a changing to a trysail or putting a trysail up to trying to change a tire on a car on a freeway while a car is still moving. It is a very difficult task to do.
So far, we've been talking about sailing in heavy weather, but there may be times when you'll have to use storm tactics. Understanding your options is the first step in handling any storm. In some storms, the wind and the seas build to a point where you can't just keep sailing in the direction you want to go. You have to take extraordinary measures to preserve the yacht and the crew. And once you're in that situation, you've got two choices. The active tactics, that's like running before the seas, or more passive, with proper setup, just letting the boat tend itself. The choice you make should be based on at least three factors. Sea room. Are you far enough from land to run downwind safely? Condition of the crew. Is the crew unskilled or already so exhausted you just shouldn't waste energy trying to cope with active boat handling? Type of boat. Some, mainly older boat designs, aren't suited for the more active downwind tactics. Each crew has a different point at which they adopt storm tactics. For some, the condition of the crew is the key. For others, it's the pounding the boat is taking trying to make progress to windward. However, the pounding the hull is taking is not as important as what's happening with the rigging. How do you know when the rig's being pushed too far?
It's very obvious. When you hit a wave and the whole mast shakes and trembles and shimmers, and you find yourself subconsciously looking up to see if it's still there, that's the time you know that you've gone too far. When you're pounding the weather, it usually means that it's windy. And when it's windy, it usually means that it's time to reef. Reefing can in itself be dangerous because it puts a whole new load in the mast that wasn't there before. We've introduced one load, which is the shock load when you hit a wave. It's the load that the mast, the momentum of the mast that wants to keep on going after the boat has stopped. That's a whole new load we've put on because we're pounding the weather. Now we're going to introduce a new load on the mast by reefing. And how that happens is that as we lower the mainsail, the head of the mainsail is no longer at the truck of the mast. It's no longer supported by the stays, the head stay and the back stay that come up. It's no longer in direct opposition of those stays. It's now somewhere in the middle of the section. What that does is through leech tension on the mainsail, it pulls the mast in a direction that's not supported by a stay. So although you think that you're doing the right thing by reefing, and indeed you are, you're lowering your sail area, you are also creating a new load on the mast. And this is the time when, if you have a staysail stay, or you have a baby stay, or you have any other stay to hold the mast forward anywhere along the mast, that's the time to put it on.
The most common rigging failure is a broken shroud or stay. If you lose a shroud, you can sometimes save the mast by tacking immediately. Regardless of the failure, quick action seems to be the key.
You can come pretty close to losing a mast and not really losing it as long as you think quickly. If it's moving all around, try to stay it as quickly and as best you can with whatever means you have. Halyards are already there, they're already rigged up. Hook them on. Hook on whatever extra stays you have, such as a baby stay, staysail stay, running backs. Support the mast as best you can, as fast as you can.
To reduce the pounding the boat and crew are taking, a primary storm tactic is to turn downwind, running before wind and seas, which allows the helmsman a chance to use the advantages inherent in boats of modern design.
I think the techniques that one would use in heavy weather conditions is changing with boat design. The Cole and Archer style boat, it made a lot of sense. You know, they're often double-ended, and you had severe conditions, you just hove to or dropped all your sails, and the boat kind of stayed there, and the waves came and the waves went over it, but the boat was so heavily built it handled it. And the steering is so good with the new boats. In severe conditions, I think one would try to keep sail up, to keep speed on the boat, and with speed on the boat you have excellent steering. So like in the old days when it may be a, quote, a survival situation, today you're still sailing downwind and, you know, in a controlled condition.
Speed and control are the keys to making this tactic work. Whitbread racers are using the same techniques, but for different reasons. The short-handed sailor caught in the same conditions will still want to move with the waves as fast as possible, while maintaining solid control of the boat. The object here is to minimize the impact of breaking waves.
When the top of the wave blows off like that, if you can sail down the wave and go with this wave that's breaking, the force on the boat will be a whole lot less. It's like if you're a skier and you get caught in an avalanche, don't stand still. Try and go in the direction that it's going. Chances are you may be able to outrun it, or if anything does hit you, it's going to hit you with less impact than if you're standing still.
On this downwind course, the boat will be surfing at speeds far greater than most sailors are used to. This shouldn't be a problem unless you're having trouble controlling the boat. Usually on a fin-keel spade rudder boat, the extra speed will increase steering control, reduce the apparent wind speed, and reduce the speed at which waves hit the boat.
From a safety standpoint, too, the speed is very important. The closer the speed of the boat is to the speed of the wave, the less force the wave has to act on the boat. It's healthier to keep some speed on and actually keep as much speed on as you can handle.
The boat's maneuverability should help the helmsman avoid breaking waves. But if conditions deteriorate, it's possible to find yourself without many choices and directions. That's what happened to Steve Taft in the 1979 Fastnet race.
And the waves were way over the top of the mast, and the mast on our boat was